So as Linda's already pointed out, the picture that you see here under the title, Days of Calamity, is a picture of Gaza. And I think probably we would all agree that we are living through days of calamity when we consider Operation Protective Edge. You know, there's a recurring theme. You know, this is really, I think, where it's at. We need to pray day and night that the cycle of violence can actually be brought to an end, because if it's not brought to an end, it will just continue and continue and continue, and each time it's going to get worse, and there are going to be more casualties, both for the Palestinian people and also for the soldiers in the IDF. We are, and we have to expect to be, certainly for the years to come, we are under constant attack. Inevitably, Israel responds with an unparalleled military response. They don't have any other way of doing it. There's no other way of doing it when you think about it. And I think it's true to say that the casualties that we see, certainly in terms of numbers, are unacceptable. We can't be content to see hundreds of children die in Gaza, Palestinian families, innocents. Of course, we understand the situation that's behind it. The numbers of soldiers that have died and given their lives for this nation. These are unacceptable losses. Inevitable, but unacceptable. This recurring theme can be taken back into history itself, and we read about this recurring theme in many places. Of course, we can consider the situation that pertained during the time of the Babylonian conquest in the 6th century before Jesus. I think it's worth noting that another major conquest of the land took place when the Greeks actually took control over this part of the world. And of course, perhaps the greatest moment in history when this theme recurred was during the time of Rome. Of course, during the time of Jesus, during the time of the early church, and in the years leading up to the destruction of the temple in AD 70. This is something that I felt the Lord really impressed upon me, and it's really one of the major emphases of this talk today and tomorrow. The days of calamity that were repeated at the time of Babylon, at the time of the Greek conquest, at the time of the Roman destruction of the temple in AD 70, there were 4 stages of calamity. There was a siege, there was a breach in the walls around Jerusalem, which led to the destruction, which eventually led to exile. The thing that is incredible, and which is really the major emphasis of the talk today and tomorrow, is that those 4 stages are commemorated by 4 fasts. We're not talking about Yom Kippur here. We're talking about 4 different fasts. The siege is remembered during the fast which is called the Fast of Tevet, which you'll come to understand in a moment. The breach in the wall is commemorated in the Fast of Tammuz, as it's called. The destruction of the temple, perhaps this is a little bit more familiar, if you remember the term Tisha B'Av, which amazingly commemorates the destruction of the temple at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and the same day saw the destruction of the temple also in AD 70. It is commemorated, as it will be in a few days now in every synagogue in this country, by the Fast of Av, Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the 5th month. But I believe that the exile is, particularly at the time of Babylon, is commemorated by another fast, which is known as the Fast of Gedaliah. Now these particular fasts take place at different times during the Jewish year. The Fast of Tevet is in the 10th month. We'll understand these things a bit better in a moment. The Fast of Tammuz is in the 4th month. The Fast of Av is in the 5th month of the Jewish year. And the Fast of Gedaliah is in the 7th month in the Jewish year. If we look at the Fast of Tevet, and here's a picture that I found which describes a siege situation, particularly at the time of Babylon. The Babylonian armies were surrounding the city of Jerusalem and it was under siege. The Fast of Tevet takes place on the 10th day of the 10th month in the Jewish year. And it's also important to know, and it would take me too long to spell this out, because we're also looking into the future as well, particularly tomorrow night. The siege is in response to a rebellion. Now, these are passages in the Bible that you might not be so familiar with, but you need to read chapters in the books of Kings and Chronicles and also in the prophet Jeremiah, which speak of the time when King Zedekiah was on the throne of Judah, who was the last king before the dispersion into Babylon and beyond. The siege from Nebuchadnezzar was in response to a rebellion, and that is also true in the time of Rome as well, and in the time of Greece. Here's some verses that spell this out to you. In 2 Kings chapter 24. Now Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. So in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, these are things that are not just taken out of nowhere, the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. He encamped outside the city and built siege works all around it. A lot could be said about the conditions and the situation of the Jewish people during that siege. That was also going to be repeated in the days of Rome. The siege possibly lasted about 18 months. There was hunger, there was death. People had to even eat the flesh of their own children in order to survive during those days. The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. Now, by the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat. Then the city wall was broken through. So the siege lasted something like 18 months, and then the walls were breached. Here's a picture of a breach in a wall. Now this is commemorated, you need to remember what I just read from Scripture, nevertheless, this is commemorated, yes, in the 4th month of the biblical year, but actually on the 17th day of the month. Now in the synagogues in this land, on the 17th day of the 4th month, Orthodox Jewish people would have had very special services remembering the breach in the city walls. You'd think, that's an interesting thing to remember in that fast, but actually we're talking of a process of stages from siege to breach to destruction to exile.
Sorry, did they remember all the breaches from the Babylonians, the Romans and the Greeks?
I think it's possible that they may certainly remember Babylon and may also remember Rome. the reason that I say that is most certainly when we get to talk about the feast of the 5th month, Tish B'Av, in fact, not just the destruction of the temple at the time of Babylon, not just the destruction of the temple at the time of Rome, but very many other calamities that took place for the Jewish people throughout their history. Now, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail tomorrow, as it happens. Now, this is, to my mind, amazing information. There is something else very significant about the 17th day of the 4th month in the Jewish year. What on earth can it be? We have to go back to Sinai. This is, of course, the children of Israel have come out of Egypt, led by Moses, and after several days, after the Passover, after the parting of the Red Sea, after several days they get to Sinai. Very interesting words. I could talk about them at great length, but I won't now. In the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert at Sinai. And of course, we're talking about Shavuot here, which is in the 3rd month, when the Lord gave Moses the tablets of stone. Now, the actual day that this took place, the actual day of Shavuot, is not set in stone itself as it happens. It's either the 5th or the 6th of Sivan, which is the 3rd month in the Jewish year. We'll understand a little bit more about these terms. This is very interesting, incredibly interesting words that we read about what was taking place at this time, leading up to the moment when God gave the Torah to Moses at Shavuot. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. I want to just highlight the fact that with the 4 leaders there were 70 elders. Remember that, because as a scientist I love to discover consistency in God's Word. And we'll see this again a little bit later. These words are incredible, aren't they, in Exodus chapter 24. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. Under his feet. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God and they ate and drank. They saw God. But we got a problem here. The New Testament tells us in John's Gospel that no man has ever seen God. So what do we make of this? Who did Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders, who then did they see? Certainly someone who has hands and feet. I would want to maintain that the person that they saw was Jesus. But we're talking Exodus. Jesus is the same yesterday, today and forever. He's the second person of the Godhead. He is the one that they saw. He is the manifestation of God to us. So the Lord said to Moses, shortly after this event, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commands I have written for their instruction." Here's another one of my questions. How long did he stay? Does anybody know? How long did he stay in the presence of God? For 40 days and 40 nights. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. It leads from Shavuot to the 17th day of the 4th month in the biblical year. So the question for us now is, what was happening in the meantime? Well, this is a very amazing event that we read about in the book of Exodus. Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and the people think, what's happened to this guy? We don't know where he's gone. And of course they go to Aaron and they ask him to make for them a god that they can serve. And you get the golden calf. The introduction of pagan religion is associated with the 17th day of the 4th month. It's a calamity. It's a day of calamity. What is God's response when the realization that the Israelites within the camp have turned to a golden calf as their God? What is God's response? We can read about it in Deuteronomy. I have seen this people, and they are a stiff-necked people indeed. Let me alone, so that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. That's God's response to the golden calf. The introduction of pagan religion into the people of God. God determines that he is going to destroy them. What about Moses? How does he respond? Here's a fantastic picture by a friend of mine, a Christian artist called Ted Larson. Many of his pictures are here. This is Moses before God. This is Moses' response. O sovereign Lord, do not destroy your people, your own inheritance that you redeemed by your great power and brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. Overlook the stubbornness of this people, their wickedness and their sin. What is this in a word? It is intercession. And what is intercession? In this instance, it's reminding God of his covenant with his people and asking for mercy. You know, there's an interesting commentary to this event in the Psalms, Psalm 106. This is what it says. Speaking of he, God. So he said he would destroy them had not Moses, his chosen one, stood in the breach before him to keep his wrath from destroying them. Intercession is standing in the breach. And on the 17th day of the 4th month, we remember the breach in the wall. It's very interesting to me that this event also is commemorated on the 17th day of the 4th month. For intercession is standing in the breach. The walls are breached. Somebody's got to stand in the breach. And this is what is remembered. The breach in the wall is remembered during the Fast of Tammuz. The question, why Tammuz? I mean, I don't know whether you're very familiar with the Jewish calendar, but the 4th month in the year is called Tammuz. Today we are in the month of Tammuz. But why Tammuz? because Tammuz is the name of a Babylonian god. And here you can see, even in the Jewish calendar, a subtle adoption of paganism. This shouldn't really surprise us when we think of the Gregorian calendar. You know, January is named after Janus, a Roman god. Actually, he has two faces, but he is the god of beginnings. February also, the name of a god. March, Mars, so on and so on. The days of the week, Sunday, Roman introduction of the worship of the sun god on Sunday. Monday, moon. If you go through all the days of the week, I think even Saturday is named after Saturn. They are names of gods. It's very interesting when you think about it. Actually, the biblical calendar is a little bit different to this. The actual biblical calendar, I'm not talking about the Jewish calendar, I'm talking of the biblical calendar, because the biblical calendar, both for months and for days, Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi'i, Yom Hamishi, Yom Shishi, Yom Shabbat. They're numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But biblically, the months are numbered. Now, there are some subtle exceptions to that before Babylon. And if anybody's interested, I've got some notes on this, and you can read about that within the notes. The fact is this, folks. Whatever sentimental feelings we have about the Jewish calendar, it is basically Babylonian. It was adopted after Babylon. But the question for us is, well, who's Tammuz? Is Tammuz mentioned in the Bible at all? And the answer is yes. We need to turn to Ezekiel chapter 8. And it's incredibly interesting. Well, I think it is anyway. Because you read about Tammuz within the context of a hole in the wall. The wall is breached. Ezekiel 8 verse 7, then he brought me to the entrance to the court, and I looked and saw a hole in the wall. He said to me, Son of man, now dig into the wall. So I dug into the wall and saw a doorway there. And he said to me, go in and see the wicked and detestable things they are doing here. I went in and looked, and I saw all over the walls all kind of crawling things and detestable animals and all the idols of the house of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders. I like it. It's just a tiny thing, I know. But for me, it sort of links this event also with that which was taking place at Sinai, because of the mention of 70 elders. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and I saw women sitting there mourning for Tammuz. It's the only mention of Tammuz in the Bible. Mourning for Tammuz. You see, Tammuz is the name of the Babylonian sun god. He happens to be the husband of Ishtar, also known as Astarte,
Is this the same as Ashton?
also known as Ashtaroth, also known as Easter. Tammuz dies. He dies in wintertime. And he is reborn in the spring. This is a very recurring theme in all pagan religion. They come under different names, Isis and Osiris and Adonis and Aphrodite in the various different pagan religions. I think it's also expressed in institutional Christianity in a very subtle way, because Jesus is brought into all of these things. Well, there's Sunday, and for the Catholic Church, Mary is the Queen of Heaven. We celebrate the birth of Jesus during the winter solstice. We celebrate his resurrection at Easter time. You know, there's interesting, subtle paganisms that are brought in to the faith that we believe in. What does the Lord say through the prophet Isaiah about this people? This is at the time of Babylon, of course. These are rebellious people, deceitful children, children unwilling to listen to the Lord's instruction. They say to the prophets, "Give us no more visions of what is right. Tell us pleasant things. Prophesy illusions. Stop confronting us with the God of Israel." You know, when I was reading these words, I thought of the evangelical church in the West, in particular, here. And if you want to talk about Israel, or even the God of Israel, or that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, all of a sudden faces glaze over. What is God's response to all of this? Ezekiel chapter 22. I looked for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land, so that I would not have to destroy it. You know, this is the same God that was speaking to Moses. This time he's speaking to Ezekiel. I looked for a man who would stand in the gap on behalf of the land, so I would not have to destroy it, but I found none. Not even Ezekiel himself. You would think, surely Ezekiel is the man. But God said, I didn't find anyone who would stand in the gap on behalf of the land. Isaiah says something a bit similar overall. Because you have rejected this message, relied on oppression and depended on deceit, this sin will become for you like a high wall, cracked and bulging, that collapses suddenly in an instant. You know, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of Tammuz, is all about a breach in the wall. Therefore, this is in the New King James, the same verses. Therefore, this iniquity shall be to you like a breach ready to fall, a bulge in a high wall, whose breaking comes suddenly in an instant. So justice is driven back and righteousness stands at a distance. Truth has stumbled in the streets. Honesty cannot enter. Truth is nowhere to be found. This is what it says next. Then the Lord saw it and was displeased that there was no justice. He saw that there was no man and wondered that there was no intercessor. The wall is breached, but where's the intercessor to stand in that breach? Can't find anybody. Ezekiel, Isaiah can't find the people to stand in the breach. So what is God to do? Isaiah tells us in the next verse. It's amazing when you look at it. In Isaiah chapter 59. Therefore, because he can't find anybody to stand in the breach, therefore, his own arm brought salvation for him, and his own righteousness, it sustained him. God has hands and feet and arms. His own arm brought salvation for him, and his own righteousness, it sustained him. Of course, in Isaiah it tells us, he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. He said words like this, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And I thought of this, that Jesus actually, at the end of the day, is our protective edge. He is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. I like this picture. It's Jesus poured out over a stone, but I say that because of the fountain of tears, but here you see Jesus poured out over this world. This is what Jesus is doing for us right now. And these words are fantastic in the book of Job. It makes you want to weep, actually. My intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God, on behalf of a man, he pleads with God as a man pleads for his friend. Jesus is our friend. It's amazing to think of it. And he ever lives to make intercession. He's standing in the breach of our lives, interceding to God. You see, there is a recurring theme. We are under constant attack. There is an unparalleled response, this time amongst the principalities and the powers. We're not fighting flesh and blood. We're fighting principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. Of course, it's what is driving Hamas. There isn't any doubt about that. But we are also on the front line ourselves. And we can be casualties. We can be easily wounded. Even if you've been a Christian for 48 years. And I have been a Christian for 48 years. On June the 29th of this year. I have known what it is to be easily wounded, even in these recent days. But look, the Bible helps us understand what we have to do. Therefore his own arm brought salvation for him, and his own righteousness, it sustained him. This is the next verse. This is Jesus. For he put on righteousness as a breastplate, and the helmet of salvation on his head. Where have we read those things before? The fact is, in the battle, and Jesus is victorious, was and is victorious in the battle against our enemy. He defeated all the principalities and the powers on the cross, disarmed them even if they continued to fight against us. They were defeated. Jesus needed protection. He put on righteousness, his own righteousness, which is perfect, as a breastplate, and the helmet of salvation on his head. And I like this picture. What is it? To tell us that we need protection too. I need protection. It's a lesson that I'm learning. This is interesting too, this picture. 3 H's. Head, heart and hand. The heart is in the middle, of course. It's our most sensitive area. Particularly if you're an emotional, heart-driven person, your heart needs to be protected. Your head needs to be protected, and your hand needs to be protected. Well, we've already read about the breastplate of righteousness, which covers our heart. The fact that we can wear a protection on our heads, which is the helmet of salvation. Of course, we can use our hands and hold up the shield of faith. I quite like this head, heart and hand business, because we are to love the Lord with all our hearts, with all our souls, which is linked to mind and consciousness. Jesus extends it to love the Lord with all our minds and with all our strength. So head, heart and hand are very significant, and we need to be protected. I need to be protected. My wife will tell you that I need to be protected. Ellie will tell you that I need to be protected. Why do we need the shield of faith? Take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. You know, if there's a physical manifestation in what we're seeing in Gaza today, remember this is true in the heavenlies, and we need a shield of faith. It's not an iron dome we need in this particular instance. Praise God for Iron Dome, that's all I can say is. But we need the shield of faith with which we can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one.
Sorry, it's so funny, isn't it? The Bible writes the flaming arrows of the evil one and a shield, and that we see the flaming arrows and the shield in physical reality.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Hey. And of course the question is, why should we protect our heads, our hearts and our hands? Why? That's the question mark. That's why a question mark is on screen. It's because we have a commission. This is what it says in Isaiah 62. I have posted watchmen on your walls. Now this is really interesting if you can see it within the context of even the fast of the 4th month, which speaks of a breach in the wall. And if you can see it within the context of speaking about standing in the breach, building up the wall. I have posted watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem. They will never be silent, day or night. What is that? This is intercession. God forbid that the Lord is looking around this room saying, I look for a man or a woman or a young man who would stand in the gap, but I couldn't find one. This is intercession. God is calling us to intercession. In the case of this nation, it's reminding God of his covenant that he's made with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, with the people of Israel. I mean, why should we remind him? He knows these things, but he wants us to remind him of them. Moses did. And we can follow in his footsteps and ask for mercy. It's going to be effective. I don't know how long it's going to take. But you who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest and give him no rest until he establishes Jerusalem and makes her a praise in the earth. I believe this day is going to come. It's obviously going to involve us all in this act of intercession. They cannot do it. The people of Israel, even the city of Jerusalem, cannot do this work. It is down to us to do it. God is calling us to intercession. It will be expressed in very different ways in each of our lives, I have no doubt, but he's calling us to be intercessors. This morning, when I got to this point, actually I was going to finish the talk a little bit differently, because this is the end of part 1 basically. But because of something that Linda sent through to me, I started looking on the internet, and all of a sudden I found this most incredible song that we will finish with tonight.
למען ציון לא אחשה, ולמען ירושלים לא אשקוט, עד יעשך נוגה צדך וישועתה כלפיד יבער וראיו ביד אדוני וצניף מלוכה בכף אלוהייך לא יאמר לך עוד עזובה ולעשך לא יאמר עוד שממה כי לך יקרב חפציבה ולעשך מעולה כי חפץ אדוני בך ועשך תיבהל כי יפעל בחור מתולה יבהלו